Welcome back, or welcome if you're just joining us. This is The World This Week. With us is Craig Capidis of Quartz in the Atlantic and Elisabeth Moutet of the Sunday Telegraph, France 24's Douglas Herbert, and from Dutch broadcaster RTL4, Stefan de Vries. Welcome back to all of you. The argument is still raging in newsrooms, not just in France or in the US, but around the world, over whether change at the top matters more in the US or in China, with the capital putting the final preparations there on the Communist Party's Congress, where the 10-year tandem of Hu Jintao and Wen Jiabao will bow out in favor next week of a new leadership. And even though China blocked the New York Times website after it reported on the billions, yes, billions of dollars stashed away by the outgoing prime minister's family, the scandal does encapsulate both what's right and what's wrong with China these days. Phenomenal growth over the past decade, coupled with an old top-down system of governing that, according to the Financial Times, finds itself vulnerable to special interests. The issue is not whether the new leaders introduce reforms, it's whether they can implement those reforms, says Stapleton Roy, a former ambassador to China. Mr. Roy says the success of a number of state-owned companies over the past decade has created a Frankenstein's monster that the party cannot easily control. Douglas Herbert, there's the sense that China could go one of two ways at this point.
Yeah, well, right now, I think the reform issue, you hit it really right on the head right now, because the problem that they're having right now is they're coming up against this party Congress. They've had more scandals and crises than they've ever faced coming into this. And, everyone calls it the once-in-a-decade leadership transition, which is the case. I mean, it's all very hushed up behind the scenes. It's supposed to be a bottom-up process. It's really the top brass deciding it from the top down. You only really find out afterwards when they all file out of the room at the end of the Congress who the new leaders are. And there's really a sense, you're absolutely right, can it go either way? Xi Jinping, who is lined up, in line to become the successor, he's already been all but anointed, the next leader of China. It's really hard to know whether he'll be able to push through those reforms. How much power will he have? How much will he be beholden to the old leaders? Hu Jintao might be formally stepping down, but he might retain some role, perhaps as head of the country's military commission, which is a not too skimpy role. So there's going to be a lot, as there always is in China behind the scenes, a lot of factional politics and infighting and clashes among the princelings. You just don't know how much leeway will this guy have to push through reforms in a growing economy.
Craig Capidis, you spent years as a Moscow correspondent. When you see all of the speculation, the mystery that surrounds this change of leadership, it's familiar to you now. Yeah,
the difference is that in China, it's the Communist Party that controls everything, and it's a very small party, unlike in the Soviet Union, where everyone was pretty much a member of the party. If you compare and contrast the two systems, the Communist Party is desperate to hold on to its power, which is obvious, and hold on to the control of all information, the release of which would lead them to lose power. One wonders how much longer the Communist Party can hold on to this power before having to implement some changes, as real changes, as Gorbachev did in Russia and the Soviet Union all those years ago. How long can you go on blocking websites? How long can you go on arresting hundreds of people and putting them in jail? But as Doug says, these are all princelings, and they're only what is it? Less than 10% of the Chinese population is a member of the party, and then there's various tiers within that party, and frankly, I've never met anyone who could ever actually figure it out, even members of the Communist Party in China. So it's crunch time.
It's crunch time, and does it matter more than the election in the United States, Elisabeth Moutet?
It certainly matters a lot, if only because most of the American debt is held by China. So we should worry about this. What's interesting is that China has managed to remain nominally a communist country with a communist party, and it's got all the oligarchs at the top of the party. You were talking about the billionaires supposedly like. Well, here's another bunch of oligarch I'm not crazy about. Not only are the outgoing prime minister, but half a dozen members are several multi-billionaires at the top of the party. So there's something sort of seriously wrong with the whole organization. But I think it can last much longer than Russia did, because Russia did not work. And China, for the given value of work, actually does work. It works for a middle class, which may be 500 million people. It certainly is improving. They are now talking about implementing social welfare because people were saving too much and saving in cash to pay for their retirement and to pay for health. So it is something that is sort of progressing with corruption and infighting and the usual things at the top.
It's a steam release valve. That's really what needs to be released here. You cannot have any these pictures any longer of hundreds of people in various villages, thousands of people in towns complaining about this and that, and Chinese police and army going around and hitting reporters over the head with billy clubs.
And one final point on this, Stefan de Vries. If the domestic politics gets too hot to handle, many fear that dispute over those tiny islands with Japan could be that release valve for the leadership of the party.
Yeah, you already see, because a lot of Japanese companies were obliged to leave China right now, and they're the most important trade partners, or number two. So yeah, that's very worrying, especially in the current context where a lot of countries, and especially Japan, is of course suffering from the economic crisis, and China could also suffer from a possible conflict.
All right, we're going to move on now. France this week picking not one, but two fights with Google. Keeping reporters at bay, the president, François Hollande, sat down Monday evening with the internet giant's chief executive, Eric Schmidt, for a long scheduled meeting, only it came amid concerted plans between Paris, Berlin, and possibly even Rome to tax Google's ad revenue from Google News searches and referencing.
I expect the French government to not be intimidated by Google's threat. Google shouldn't be deciding what France's policies should be.
All right, the head of that News Weekly magazine. The French government, by the way, still negotiating on that score, but it might be a losing battle. Google rules referencing, plus French media are actually divided over that idea. Fortunately, a much better battle reared its head on Wednesday. Investigative weekly Le Canard Enchaîné breaking the story of a €1 billion fine by the French taxman for tax evasion. Google denies the story. The Irish Times, though, finding court papers that show Google making more than €1.25 billion in ad revenue in France last year and paying just over €5 million in corporate tax. That makes it a 0.4% tax rate, if you will. The Irish Times writing that Google, which declares its European profits in Ireland, insists that all its advertising in the region is handled by staff based in Dublin, and that Google France's work is limited to marketing assistance and service support. A Paris Court of Appeals finding the notion of independence suggested in that contract between Google Ireland Limited and Google France Limited, quote, does not correspond with reality. Craig Capitas, why are you shaking your head?
François Hollande this week crossed the Rubicon from foolish to dangerous. Google is not breaking any laws. No. Not a one. If François Hollande...
But is it unethical to be...
Ethics don't count here, François. The law says what it says. And if François Hollande were a true leader, he would be saying to Eric Schmidt, what's your tax rate in Ireland? Let's see if we can do better or match it so we can have more tax revenue here. Instead of telling the French businessmen to get lost on the believe the figure is 30 billion euros in cuts for social services, etc., tells them to get lost. You know, he acts like Louis Philippe and the last king of France. And instead of calling them in and saying, let's compromise on this, what does he do? He gives him and his little coterie of graduate students, give him the bum's rush. Now, Ireland, which is also in a lot of trouble, is making money off of Google. Why are they making money off of Google? Because they have a tax base there that makes doing business out of Ireland much better for a company. And if François Hollande were a real leader, which I believe he is not.
Hold on, this is revenue generated in France. Should there be a 0.4%
if he wants to take it, look, if the government of France
tax rate on that?
If the government of France wants to challenge that in court, go right ahead. We'll be talking about this court case 5 years from now. He is not being proactive. He is being reactive, and that's no way for a leader to act.
Stefan de Vries?
I totally agree. Actually, the problem here is that it's a European problem. I mean, it's completely legal. Actually, even state-owned French companies use all kinds of tax constructions to optimize tax payments, completely legal, with the support of the French government. So what François Hollande is doing is completely hypocritical, and it is stupid. I do agree, because he's chasing Google. Google already threatened to not reference French media sites anymore, which would basically end French media on the internet, because they really rely on Google. And well, sending this letter of 1 billion in late taxes is like the French equivalent of a horse's head in a bed, and I think it's not really smart, and he also shows that he doesn't understand a thing of the global economy.
Nothing.
And
nothing.
Google, I mean...
Yeah, I mean, Google will be the winner
okay,
here.
but can this jumpstart the argument the debate over tax harmonization within the European Union and within the Eurozone?
Of course, but do you think that France would like that? Because a lot of French companies are profiting from these constructions. And if you, I mean, Ireland has like a flat tax rate of 15%, something like that. But there are so many exceptions for French companies, for instance, that the effective tax rate in France is similar to the tax rate in Ireland. But that's not something that François Hollande likes to admit, because these are big companies that have a huge, strong lobby in French politics, and that's not something that will go down well in his electorate.
And he's going, and you know who's going to get hurt on this too? It's the French media. Because frankly, Google can live, and the world can live without running Le Monde on the web, and that's a tragedy. That's a real tragedy.
There's still negotiations on that point. Speaking of tax, well, I guess what are we going to say? Tax evasion, tax optimization, tax avoidance. The Greeks are finally putting people in the dock over what's become known as the Lagarde list. 2,000 Greeks who stashed savings in Switzerland, list handed over in 2009 by the then French finance minister. Justice may not be swift, but at least it's justice served, right? Wait a minute, though. They're not tax dodgers in the dock. They're journalists accused of violating data privacy laws. Fortunately, though, they were acquitted.
The court's ruling sets an important precedent that gives my colleagues the opportunity to do their jobs, to tell the truth without being hostages, free of any obligation and without constraints.
Craig Kapidis, I know it's a story you've followed. That list has been bandied around since 2009. Were you surprised to see the first prosecutions in the case were against journalists?
I actually was, and I was relieved to see how quickly it went through the courts and how quickly the judge down there threw it out, which I can tell you is a really positive sign for Greece. I found that to be extremely the most positive thing I've seen in Greece for at least a year. That they said enough of this, Monsieur, enough. We've got to clean this mess up. And I thought it took a lot of guts for that reporter to publish this list. And you leave yourself asking yourself why. Well, how come, Miss Lagarde didn't do something with this? How come the two
Troika.
parties in Greece, didn't do anything with this? How come others didn't do it with this? Again, it goes to show you that people with money have all the power.
It's Z reversed.
Yeah.
If you remember Z.
Yes, it's Z reversed. That's
Z
exactly
reversed.
right, Anne. That's what it is.
And what's going to happen to the two ex-finance ministers who, one of them even said that we lost the list at one point?
Yeah.
What's going to happen to them?
Oh, I don't think they're going to be around much longer.
One of them's the head of the opposition Socialist Party, the PASOK.
Greek ministers, they come and go like snowflakes and melt away. I think they will just vanish into the haze. I think that any prosecutions down there on corruption of this scale in the past has been very, very slow moving. it would be interesting to see if the courts do go after, if the government does go after these people, if the case is handled with the speed and alacrity as it was in the case of the journalists. That'll be interesting to see.
And how much money they'll get back as a result. Several billion, which they could use.
The real problem being the church anyway, and the church is not in the dock so far. The church doesn't pay taxes. It owns a majority of the land, I think, in Greece.
And is supporting the ultra-right wing in many instances down there.
There's a question, though. This came from a list that was leaked from somebody at HSBC in Switzerland to France. Now, that list was mostly French people. What's happened, Stéphane de Vries, with all the French people who are on the list?
Very good question. I think their lawyers are studying all kinds of options of tax optimization, whether it be in Ireland or in France. I don't know what. I think a lot of people actually paid or made a deal with the French.
Yeah, there was.
No, but there's a legal snag because the list is not. It was not obtained along legal ways, and it was not entered into the legal process in a legal way, so that actually nobody can make a case against these people. So the tax people hurried to intimidate them into confessing, because otherwise they were nowhere. And those who stuck tight and decided, well, no, I'm not admitting, I'm not denying, they're fine. I mean, they are going to be sort of controlled by the taxmen every year until they die, but they can't be condemned because legally they don't have grounds to condemn them.
All right, final point on this, Douglas Herbert. In the age where it seems to be digitally harder and harder to keep a secret, are we going to see loopholes close when it comes to dodging tax?
Well, like you said, you can't keep the secret anymore. I mean, the lists are going to get out. You're going to have the names, and I think more power to anyone who publishes the names. I mean, this is like it's WikiLeaks, but it's a good version of WikiLeaks. I think in the digital age, you're absolutely right. There's going to be absolutely no choice but to be more careful where you stash your money, or not to stash it anywhere.
But there are different tax havens. I mean, today the places to go: Singapore, Ukraine.
But they're going to
places where they have no freedom of information.
Absolutely. But I also think that in the digital age, slowly the list, the dragnet is going to extend. There's going to be fewer and fewer places in the world where you could consider a safe haven for money. Yes, and for now, a lot of places in Asia now remain because Europe is now becoming more and more off the charts, off the radar.
If the retribution becomes militaristic, as seems to be the case that's going here, you're going to see more capital flight to places like Singapore and other areas.
All right, there's the prediction from Craig Capidis. Craig Capidis and Douglas Herbert, who we shall see election night for our coverage here on France 24. Our programming note for you, our coverage which will begin at 10 p.m. Paris time. That's 4 p.m. in the United States and continue throughout the evening. I want to thank as well Stéphane de Vries and Anne-Elisabeth Moutet for being with us. Thank you for joining us here in The World This Week.